In my 3.5 years of teaching, the biggest takeaway that I have in creating student leadership can be summed up to the following phrase: learning needs to extend beyond the classroom. I believe that students need to be given ample opportunities to reach their full potential in our society. And many times, the opportunities or the most impactful opportunities happen to be or happen to take place outside of the traditional classroom setting. I'm extremely passionate about community service because it was through community service that I learned how to be a leader. And I had this vision of teaching my students the importance of community service and helping them to really learn how to be leaders through this experience. After my first year of teaching, however, I wasn't able to really accomplish this vision, and I didn't really teach my students. I didn't even bring this up in my classroom. So if you were to ask me at the end of my first year of teaching if I thought that I had made a transformational impact on my students, my answer would have been an unequivocal no. So I reflected on this, and in my second year, I organized a service conference as well as a service trip to San Antonio. Due to the transportation costs of traveling from Houston, where I was teaching, to San Antonio, I was only able to invite about 40 students, which was the amount of students that were able to fit on a yellow school bus. Many more students were interested, but I took students on a first-come, first-served basis. It took a little bit of convincing on my part to get my school director to agree to this. One of her main reservations was, why San Antonio, and why couldn't I have just planned something in Houston so that it would have saved the school several hundreds of dollars because of the transportation, and more students would have been able to participate. The reason that I chose to have my students go to San Antonio, though, was I really wanted them to experience the power of the collective power of the community. And the way that I had learned this was through an organization called City Year. City Year is an AmeriCorps program that focuses on empowering the community by focusing on at-risk students. I volunteered with this program for a year in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right after college, and I really learned the importance of giving back, and also just that my individual contribution, it can make a difference. So I decided to bring my students to San Antonio. Every year, City Year organizes an event on the weekend of, or during the weekend of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And I was able to coordinate this trip so that my students were participating in this event. And I really saw my students step up as leaders during this service trip. There were a multitude of different service events going on that day in San Antonio, just through City Year. So some of my students were helping to create benches for a soccer field. Some of them were helping to plant flowers for a church, and so on and so forth. But through all of these different events, the resounding theme at the very end of the day was they really truly felt like they made an impact that day, and they wanted to do more of it, and they asked if we could do it again next year. Unfortunately, I didn't return to that school the following year. I actually moved to Hawaii. But when I was in Hawaii, I learned that, or not that I learned, but I wanted to continue this, my role of giving back to my students by showing them that they can be leaders. I didn't organize a service event, but I did organize a trip to Japan. The reason being, I actually grew up in Hawaii, and I knew from experience that not many people leave the island until maybe they go away for college, because it's just extremely expensive to travel to and from the island since it's so isolated. I only brought 5 students on this trip, but I did witness the same thing. Because it was a non-traditional classroom setting, my students were able to learn how to be leaders in the real world. So whenever we got lost, or whenever we needed help with public transportation, or whatever the case, I challenged them to ask a Japanese person for help. Even though they really lacked the language skills, I still challenged them to ask. This forced them to step out of their comfort zone and to rely on themselves, to be responsible. And I also challenged them by giving them free time. And I would say, you know, you guys have a couple of hours, meet me back here. And again, they couldn't understand the language, they couldn't read the directions so well, but I had faith in them because I knew that they were, or I trusted that they were going to stay together. And this helped them develop into leaders because they had to be accountable for one another. They had to make sure that each other was okay and that they were going to stick together. Not only that, but my students challenged me in this trip by helping me to realize that need to be they need to have power over the itinerary as well. So they voiced their opinions or their interest in where they wanted to go, and I took this into account, and I was able to let them visit the places that they wanted. So this is my 4th year of teaching now, and I'm actually back in Houston. I haven't, again, I feel like because I'm in a new role and with grad school and everything else going on in my life, I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to bring community service or international travel into my classroom. But I know that in the future, this is something I want to continue to do. In fact, my greatest aspiration would be to organize a service trip, either in another city or another country every year, so my students, again, can learn firsthand that they're capable of making a change in our community, that they can be agents of change. So I'm still working on this, but I'm extremely passionate about it, and I know that if I continue to look for opportunities, that my students will thrive when they're given them. Thank you so much.